Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Eric Blake. I am the founder and lead financial planner of Blake Wealth Management here in McKinney, Texas. I'm also the host of the Simply Retirement podcast, which is probably where most of you are going to know me from. It is my pleasure to share with you some insights and information I've learned about retirement income planning for women over the last 25 years that I've been a financial planner. Now, if you're here, it probably means that you are thinking ahead towards retirement, or you might even be recently retired, but still wondering how you're going to replace the income that you're going to need to meet your expenses when those paychecks stop coming in. It's possible you've spent many years saving and scrimping. You may have achieved a good sized piggy bank or nest egg, maybe a couple of different piggy banks. Yet there is still worry that your savings and investments are not going to be enough to support you through your golden years. And I want to share some insights and strategies that can hopefully give you a level of comfort as you make the transition into what is hopefully the best part of life. Now, of course, and let's make sure my little clicker works. There we go. All right. So, of course, we always have a little bit of housekeeping. Just take a look at the disclosures you have on your screen here. Just remember that this is primarily for educational and informational purposes only. Be sure you want to consult your tax advisor, your financial advisor, if you do have any specific questions. If you don't have a financial advisor or a tax advisor, or maybe you're looking for a second opinion on your retirement income plan, I'll share more about how we can help as we wrap up our time together this evening. So over the next, let's call it 45 minutes or so, I want to keep the presentation to about that length of time, so we'll get plenty of time for question and answers at the end. But we're going to talk about how you can manage your piggy banks to generate the retirement income that you're going to need. I'm going to walk you through some basic guidelines to building retirement income plan, and I'm going to be happy to take your questions again at the end of the presentation, but feel free to go and start dropping those in to make sure we don't miss anything. This workshop is titled Life After Work, because retirement income planning is really all about creating a good life for yourself after you leave your primary job. It doesn't mean you may not still continue to work in some capacity. In fact, many pre-retirees are planning to continue to work in some capacity after they leave their main job. But we hope that that's going to be work that you do in retirement that won't feel like work. Work is a thing that you're getting away from. Life is what we want you moving toward. Now, like anything else, you need to figure out how you're going to fund your life after work. And you're going to need what I call a spending plan. I don't talk about budgets when we're talking about retirement planning. I don't like the term budget. I think it's too restrictive. We want a spending plan. We want to spend on purpose. We want to spend with intent. We want to be purposeful in our spending, especially in retirement. Now, because for many women, we are talking about 30 years here where you are responsible for your own paycheck. And given the length of time that we're looking at, you need to have a solid retirement income plan. So if there was a time to plan, retirement is that time. Once you leave your primary occupation, you start depending on multiple sources of income in retirement. You want to make sure that income lasts. No one wants to go back to work at age 80 because they didn't have a plan. They didn't plan right. So it's really important that you have that plan. And a retirement income plan is going to help you determine how much income you're going to need, where that income is going to come from, when you're going to start Social Security, whether or not you are going to work, how to manage withdrawals from your retirement and your investment accounts in order to have a sustainable lifestyle throughout retirement. And above all, we want to be sure that your income outlasts your very last breath of air. So again, we need a plan to manage your retirement savings over what could be a 30-year time period, maybe even more, because you could definitely live to 100 plus. And of course, the problem with long is the question of whether you're going to have enough money. How is your retirement planning? How is it measuring up? If you start looking at where you're at today, how confident do you feel in your retirement income strategy? Now, this is a 2023 Retirement Confidence Survey, and you can see what they expect in terms of major and minor income sources compared to the actual income sources in retirement. Now, these income sources include Social Security, employment earnings, investments, and pension plans. But for example, if you look at workplace retirement savings plans, they're expected to be a major source of income for 84% of workers who haven't reached retirement yet. But the actual source of income is about 49% of retirees. So retirement plan tends to play a smaller role in retirement income than many people realize before they actually retire. Now, sometimes expectations don't match the reality of your finances post-retirement. So again, it's crucial to create and follow a detailed retirement strategy that leaves little to chance. And many times, this is done with the help of a good financial advisor who has the resources, the knowledge, and the technology to analyze your current financial situation and help you organize a roadmap or a financial plan that's going to help you model your cash flow throughout your retirement years. Now, here's some really critical stats I want to walk you through as we talk about the importance of planning again. So when you're looking at some statistics specifically that apply to women, here's the first one. 36% of women say they are either not too confident or not at all confident in their ability to retire. So then we say, well, what about beyond just having enough to live comfortably throughout your retirement years? Only 11% of unmarried women said yes. And you just want to be aware that the average widow in the United States is about 59 years old. We're also seeing the highest rate of divorce occurring at the higher ages in the retirement years, called gray divorce or silver divorce. You may have heard of this term in the past. But in a bit, I'm going to share another staggering but very critical stat that women need to be aware of as well. So one of the things, of course, we talked about in terms of looking at retirement income sources is Social Security. A big stat that you really want to be aware of, if you're not, is that women represent 56% of all Social Security beneficiaries age 62 or older, and about 66% of all beneficiaries age 85 and older. Why would that be? As we probably have heard many, many times, life expectancy. Women outlive men, so that's where we see these numbers come into play when we're talking about just specifically around Social Security benefits. And here's the biggest one I was referring to just a couple of slides ago. 80 to 90% of women will be solely responsible for their finances at some point in their lives. Mainly that's due to divorce, but also, again, the fact that on average, women outlive men by an average of about 7 years. So that's why, again, having this planning is so critical. And here's one last stat I'm going to share with you. Just know that the financial landscape in this country is changing. By 2030, women are expected to inherit $34 trillion. And having a plan is going to be absolutely critical. So that's where we want to start looking at how we can start building a solid retirement income plan for you tonight. All right, so the first thing I want you to do is imagine your life in retirement. We need to take a moment here, and I want you to visualize how we want to live our new life. How will things be different after you leave your current job? How do you want your life to be? Where will you live? What are you going to be doing? How are you going to be spending your time? How long do you think you're going to live? What surprises does life hold? Actually, we know there's going to be surprises. There's going to be things that happen that we just can't prepare for. But again, making sure we have a contingency plan built into our strategy is going to be important there as well. But we also need to know, how much income are you actually going to need? So let's talk about one of the critical factors here. And this is, for many women, that's the first consideration, is where are they going to live? Because obviously not everybody changes their residence in retirement, but a lot of people do. So if you're not tied to a job any longer, you can be free to potentially live anywhere you want. Perhaps you want to live closer to your children or grandchildren. A lot of times that is a big factor for women specifically. But maybe you'd like to downsize so that affordability will be a key consideration. If you do plan to work or run a business, you'll want to think about areas with the right employment or business opportunities for you. If you plan to do some travel, maybe you even want to think about living near the airport. And then there's some of the usual preferences, things like climate, culture, recreational opportunities, things around you that you can get involved in. So where you end up living can definitely have an impact upon your retirement budget. So this is one of the first questions you'll want to think about. Up on the slide here, I've included some information from a recent poll from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies that was released just a couple of years ago in 2023. Sometimes looking at what other people are doing can actually help you and make your decisions. So let's talk about how much you need. So if you are considering downsizing, a significant amount of Americans' net worth is tied up in that home equity and the value of their home. especially even though some of these real estate values may have stabilized a little bit recently, but we've seen some significant growth in home equity over the last several years. Now, this home equity is generally non-income producing and illiquid. Now, actually, you can unlock some of this home equity with certain financial instruments like reverse mortgages, but they can also hamstring your flexibility later on in life down the road. So making the decision to downsize or even potentially rent may unlock a substantial portion of your net worth to help you support your standard of living in retirement. Now, considering how much of your savings are tied up in your house, also think about the resulting maintenance, the taxes, the insurance, the other expenses. So if you do continue to own, you should consider right-sizing your home, which may mean potentially downsizing. Maybe you're downsizing from a 4-bedroom, 3-bath to a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, something along those lines, something that's less costly to maintain and also meets your current and your future needs. You and your family need to think about some of these issues and determine what you're going to need in retirement. So again, this is a big one here. I want to spend some time on this one. This is what will you do? Actually, one of the biggest things that happens to any retiree once they've left the workforce, you got to find how you're going to spend your time. And sometimes that's one of the biggest challenges because if you're not working anymore, how will you fill your time? From a financial perspective, you think about daily activities are going to fall into 2 categories. We got income generating activities, but then we have expense generating activities. So if you work or you run a profitable business, you're going to be generating income from your daily activities. But on the other hand, if you're not working at all, you'll need to fill your time doing something. And unless you plan to take walks or read library books all day, you may end up spending some money on things like travel or hobbies or entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with this, but you'll have to factor these expenses into your spending plan. Again, I want you to think about this as spending intentionally, a spending plan, not a budget. But of course, if you plan to start a new business, don't forget that it may not be profitable right off the bat. So you want to make sure you're accounting up what's going to take to get into that business if that's one of your plans or one of your goals when you get to retirement. Now, people can spend almost as much money in retirement as they do when they worked. An industry rule of thumb is to expect to spend about 70% as much per year in retirement as you did while working. So the more free time you have, potentially the more time you can expect to spend. Because again, you want to travel, vacations and long weekends are going to cost some money. Are you going to take up more hobbies that you want to start when you are in retirement? It's always a good idea to run a customized analysis of your cash flow, your monthly expenses, and your future plans to see what needs to go into your retirement plan. Now, here's what I know. It is a critical factor when you're talking about retirement planning for women, and that's how long you're going to live. Because, you know, if we knew the answer to that question, obviously that would make retirement planning so much easier because your life expectancy ultimately will determine how long your money needs to last. And unfortunately, we have to plan for a worst case scenario. And that means potentially making the assumption that you're going to live to your mid-90s or maybe even 100 and beyond. So the average life expectancy in the US is 79.1 for a female. But if you've made it to age 65, there's a 53% chance that you're going to live to 85 and even a 32% chance that you're going to live to 90. And then if you're still married, for a couple, there's a 72% chance that one of the spouses is going to live to age 85 and a 45% chance that one of the spouses will live to 90. Now, obviously, if we die before that, it means we could have lived it up a little bit more. But what if we don't? Having some life left at the end of your money means your retirement plan failed. But you won't know that until it's too late. So don't rely on the average life expectancy for your retirement income plan. You want to be safe and assume that you're going to live into your 90s. So again, just understanding that if the average life expectancy across all demographics is 79, if you're close to retirement, you're getting near those retirement years, or you're in those retirement years, your life expectancy has changed. It is now longer. So from a planning perspective, I typically try to look at somewhere between 92 for males, 95 for females for planning purposes. So what surprises does life hold? Actually, unexpected events can derail the best laid plans for a successful retirement. And of course, if you knew what surprises life would hold in store for you, they wouldn't be surprises. But part of retirement income planning is taking a look at your life and the world around you and considering the unexpected. Actually, health is a big issue for retirees. If you have Medicare and you have a supplement policy, many of your healthcare expenses will be covered, except for those premiums, those copays, of course. But the biggest concern potentially is long-term care, or what now is often referred to as extended care. What if you need extended health care beyond just what Medicare can cover? Now, ironically, it's the healthiest people who are most likely going to need it. So if you live so long that the infirmities of natural aging prohibit you from performing activities of daily living, you'll need some type of nursing or skilled nursing as you get into your older years. According to a recent study by Fidelity, and I think these numbers actually probably are a little bit higher recently, but Fidelity did a study where a retiring couple can expect that through the course of their retirement, they'll incur expenses of $250,000 for health care. And I think I actually saw recent numbers that said it was probably closer to $300,000. Surprises can come from family members as well. Actually, we know for women, you end up being the primary caregiver for aging parents, or it could even be what they call boomerang children that might be moving back in the home for certain reasons. But you need to be prepared for the unexpected expenditures of both time or money. Plus, we also know the economy always seems to be full of surprises. We're going through some challenging stuff right now, some uncertainty, but how you manage your retirement portfolio is going to be critical in how you manage economic and market changes, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later. All right, so how much income will you need? There's a couple of different ways you can go about this. One is that maybe we'll call it a little bit lazier way. The lazy answer is just to say, okay, I'm just going to assume that I need about 70 to 80% of your current living expenses. So if you're not retired yet, 70 to 80% is just an easy way to come up with a number. And again, this assumes you're no longer going to be funding your retirement plans. You're going to save on expenses associated with working. That could be transportation. It could be eating out for lunch, those types of expenses. But you want to consider how you're going to spend all of that free time, again, as I talked about earlier, and it's probably going to cost you some money that you weren't spending while you're working. So you're going to have things that are going to get added back into your spending plan. So the more accurate way to estimate your income needs is to set up a spending plan as if you were already retired. And in fact, that's one of the things we often recommend is practicing retirement in that last year or so before you actually do retire, because this is where the answers to some of those questions are going to come into play. So if you know where you're going to be living and whether or not your mortgage will be paid off, then you can more accurately estimate what your housing costs might be in retirement. Do you want to do this for every category? Find those key categories, look at where you're spending money today, what stuff might be subtracted because you are no longer working, what stuff though is going to get added in, things you're going to be doing in retirement, changes to housing, those types of things. Figure out what's going to be added, what's going to be taken away when you're looking at your spending plan. And then once you have an idea of how much you're going to spend in your retirement years, especially those expenses in the initial years of retirement, now, of course, it's going to be time to identify our potential sources of income. So you want to identify how you're going to pay for all this. You may have spent the last 30 or 40 years putting money into IRAs and 401ks and building up a nest egg that ideally is going to sustain you for the remainder of your life. Then we start talking about what some of these different pieces of that retirement income puzzle look like. One of those piggy banks or income sources for most people is going to be Social Security. And if you and or your spouse are eligible for Social Security, you need to consider how to claim Social Security to help maximize your expected benefits. Then you might have a pension. That may be another part of your retirement income puzzle. If you have one, you may need to be making decisions about elections on whether or not there's going to be a spousal or survivor benefit or something that's going to pass to your heirs. If you have an annuity contract, maybe you need to think about whether it has living benefits or any type of a guaranteed income component to that. That may be able to provide income and maybe even some guaranteed withdrawals during your lifetime. Again, a lot of people are working. You may decide to work part-time in retirement just to keep active, keep yourself busy, keep your mind active, finding something that you enjoy doing, that you want to do, something that may be completely different from what you've done in your full-time work. But you might want to work part-time. Then we say, do you own any investment properties or have interest in any businesses that are going to continue to generate income after your retirement? So what's so different about retirement compared to working full-time in your primary occupation is that you have to manage all these income sources. Again, it's very much like a puzzle. How do all these pieces actually fit together? Because you're not going to be able to just count on a direct deposit of a paycheck that is high enough to meet all of your income needs. Each of these income sources has different characteristics, and it's important to keep these characteristics in mind when you're arranging all of these different retirement pieces of your puzzle. So let's go a little bit deeper in some of these different characteristics of the different retirement income sources. The first one we've got is Social Security. And again, I've always said this is one of the most underrated, undervalued pieces of the retirement income puzzle, because for many of you on here, it is going to be the only source of lifetime guaranteed income that actually increases every single year based on inflation. I know it gets a bad rap. I know there's a lot of stuff in the news about the Social Security system's running dry. There's a lot of news recently about what's going on with cutting costs and all these different things. Bottom line is you still have to make smart decisions when it comes to your Social Security benefits. If you happen to be one of those lucky few people that does still get a pension, that income is also going to be guaranteed for life. But for the most part, not the case across the board, but for the most part, pensions generally are not adjusted for inflation. So as your expenses increase, you'll have to fill that from somewhere else. As inflation goes up, your costs, your expenses go up. If that pension stays the same, you're going to have to fill that gap in some other way. Again, maybe you plan to work during retirement. Depending on what kind of work you're going to be doing, and if you own your own business, your income could be fixed or variable. And you want to keep in mind that this income will not last forever. There's going to be at some point where you're going to have to start working for good. So it might be health reasons. It could be your personal choice. We all want it to be our own choice, but you just never know. So you might have to want to stash some of your earnings into savings for when that future day comes when you are not able to work any longer. And of course, then there's investment income. This is going to include withdrawals to take from your investment accounts, your retirement accounts, your savings accounts, maybe rental properties, or any of these other types of assets that you might own. And this is the trickiest part of retirement income planning. The income may be fixed, it may be variable, it's often taxed, and you must actively manage it to make sure that it lasts you throughout your lifetime. So let's talk about what the average retirement income sources are. The average retiree has about $48,000 a year. That's about $17,000 that's going to come from Social Security, $7,000 from pensions, and about $3,300 coming from savings, dividends, and income property from other types of property. Now, a survey done by Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that 61% of retirees rely on Social Security. The next up is pensions. About 14% rely on those, followed by 10% relying on 401ks and IRAs. Now, again, things are shifting. Things are changing between, the elimination of pensions to some extent. Obviously, there's people that have concerns about what the future of Social Security holds. If you have questions about that, again, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. We'll talk about those as we wrap up tonight. But let's take a closer look at some of these specific retirement income sources. So when you're looking at your retirement income, again, most people start with Social Security because it's a predefined amount of income. Once you turn 62, your Social Security benefit is calculated based on your earnings history. Before you turn 62, the Social Security Administration estimates your benefit, assuming your present earnings are going to continue. The best thing you can do to find out what your benefit estimate is refer to your most recent statement, your latest annual statement from the Social Security Administration. And right now, for the most part, you want to go online to find that information. They also have a lot of different retirement estimators, which into your earnings history, so you can do some estimates depending on what your future earnings might look like. Another common source of income is a pension. Again, the big question is whether or not you even have. Most employers have abandoned these company-sponsored pension plans because they were costing way too much. But if you're one of the lucky ones that happens to have, you've got some homework to do. You want to find out exactly what your benefit options are. Do you need a survivor benefit, a 100% survivor benefit, a 50% survivor benefit? Again, you want to make sure you understand those options. You also want to see whether or not it has a lump sum option. Can you take a lump sum, roll that to an IRA, and give yourself maybe a little more flexibility, or maybe you want to leave something for children and grandchildren? A lot of times, the lump sum option is the only way to go about doing that. We're not talking 401ks when we're talking pension. You've got employer funded plans, which is typically the pension. You've got employee funded plans, which is typically going to be the 401k. So let's talk about work. More and more people are planning to work during retirement. And I suppose you could then question the word retirement for this time of life, but often it takes a different type of form. If you plan to keep working at your present job, you aren't really retiring. You're just delaying retirement. And in many cases, that is a very good decision. It gives you a few more years of work, a little bit more financial security. Maybe you can delay your Social Security benefits a little bit longer. Maybe it gives you a chance to continue to boost savings, to save more, accumulate more before you retire. Also, that's less years of having to withdraw money from your portfolio, from your investment assets as well. All of that, it's a really great reason, depending on your specific situations. None of that's a bad thing. Again, in many cases, it could be a very intelligent way to go about your planning. But once you leave your main job, there's more than likely several different work options that may be available to you. Maybe you have the opportunity to consult. Maybe you even still have a relationship with that previous employer where you're acting more in a consultant capacity or part-time, doing things that you may still have been doing in the past, but now, again, you have a little bit more control over of your calendar, your schedule, but still have another source of income. So again, other people, you may just want to do something completely different, something you've got a passion for, and you've always really wanted to do, just didn't have the time or didn't have the opportunity. So these are all different things that you want to look at. But again, as you start thinking about your retirement income plan, how long do you expect to work? So if you retire from your full-time job, you're 65, and you say, hey, do I plan to work part-time for the next 10 years, for the next 5 years? What is your plan for that? So again, you want to make sure all that fits into the puzzle so that you don't get surprised. So let's talk about annuities. This is another somewhat frequent source of income, but a lot of confusion around annuities and how they work and what the costs are, some different things that you want to be aware of. But it is a potential source of income. And in many cases, an annuity is similar to a pension in that it can provide guaranteed income. However, it is going to be funded through your own personal investments, not by your employer. Now, if you have an existing annuity, you may be thinking about considering whether this annuity has potential investment for income replacement. Does it give you some income, some lifetime income options, things that some of the different features that annuities can provide, living benefits, it can provide guaranteed death benefits. Does it offer an annuitization option where you basically take the asset, you surrender the asset to the insurance company that issued the annuity, but in return, they may pay you a guaranteed lifetime income. So you want to understand all the bells and whistles if you happen to have an annuity, if you're even thinking about getting an annuity at some point down the road. Because annuities are they're pretty complicated. They can be expensive. There's often penalties, withdrawal charges associated with the contracts. And again, while they can offer tax deferral, withdrawals are often going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. That's something a lot of people aren't aware of as well. So if you're considering an annuity as part of your retirement plan, you just want to look closely at the prospectus, and you want to work with an advisor, work with an agent that can help you explore all the options that you have, and obviously potentially the cost of each of those options as well. So now you look at investment income. Throughout our lives, we acquire a lot of these different piggy banks that we stuff money into over the years for a lot of different reasons. Some of these are retirement accounts like IRAs or Roth IRAs or 401ks. They may be non-retirement accounts like checkings accounts, CDs, brokerage accounts, all these different sources. But all these accounts are going to be important because they represent piggy banks that are stuffed with your savings that can eventually help you fund your retirement goals. And then last, we have just a few other sources of income I want to touch on. It's a relatively small percentage of most retirees' income comes from these types of assets, but it's things like, again, income producing properties, interest in a business that will continue on into your retirement years. Often this type of income is variable, but it does need to be considered along with your other income sources. So once you've identified all the sources of income, that's when you can start tapping into your retirement. You just want to understand what these sources look like and make sure they fit into your puzzle. So let's talk about looking at how do we start providing income from your investment assets. So again, we talked about Social Security. It's pretty much defined. You know what it's going to be. Same thing with a pension. If you've got rental income, all those are somewhat, you can almost consider them fixed. But then we start looking at your retirement withdrawal strategy. These are the primary withdrawal strategies or options for drawing income from your investments, from your retirement accounts. I'm going to walk you through kind of what these basics are, but then I'm going to also share with you how we go about doing it, because I definitely think that it offers some advantages that you want to be aware of. Well, one of the other things, so just to quickly touch on, one of the reasons why this area is so important is because depending on how much you have accumulated in retirement assets, this might give you some additional flexibility. As an example, you might say, hey, I want to retire at 65, but I don't want to start drawing Social Security until 70 to fully maximize my Social Security benefits. Well, if that's the case, you've got that 5-year window of time to fill a gap. Now, you may not really want to work for those extra 5 years. So it really comes down to, do I have enough investment assets, retirement assets to fill that gap in the meantime? But again, it's really important to understand what are the most effective ways of withdrawing those assets. As I mentioned, the first one is pretty simple, straightforward. It's just living off the interest. And this is a pretty classic approach. It's probably what your parents did, where you have income generating investments like bonds or dividend paying stocks, CDs, where they just generate some income. You don't ever touch the principal. You might even just have the interest generated from CDs, just direct deposited right into your bank account and just off the interest. Now, actually, the challenge has been, up until at least recently, that interest rates have been so low that that's really been difficult. Hasn't even been enough to keep up with inflation. So you got to be really careful about that. That's something that I talk about quite a bit. Being too aggressive with your investments in retirement, what most people think about, they think about losing money in the stock market. But being too conservative can be just as risky, not maintaining purchasing power. If we're talking about a 30-year retirement and your investments aren't even keeping up with inflation, eventually you are going to have to start depleting those assets. It potentially increases the chances of running out of money down the road. There's something called the 4% rule. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this here in just a little bit, but basically it's a concept that was developed back in the 90s. And it simply says that you're going to start whatever your pile of money is, whatever your nest egg is, you're going to simply withdraw 4% every single year from that amount. So just using some pretty straightforward examples, if you got $1 million, 4% is $40,000. So every year you start with 40,000, you can make some adjustments for inflation. If inflation is 3% in the following year, you increase that 40,000 to 41,200. And you do that ongoing, but you don't really change your strategy. You stick to that 4% withdrawal rate throughout your retirement. Now, what I'm going to show you is a different way of approaching that. I see some of the challenges with the 4% rule, but it can be a viable strategy for many people. You have the bucket strategy. And again, this is a really solid strategy that can work for a lot of people. And this is basically just thinking about your money in buckets. So when you see your investment statement, and again, I'll just use that $1 million just so it's a round number, but you look at your investment statement and it says you got $1 million. Well, that's just one number. Conceptually, what the bucket strategy says is I really have that $1 million divided up into 3 separate buckets based on when I think I'm going to use that money or when I'm going to need that money. You might have a bucket for the next 5 years, from 0 to 5 years. So you got enough money to cover your next 5 years of income. That money is going to be pretty secure, pretty safe. It might be CDs, it might be bonds, but pretty conservative so that you know over the next 5 years it's going to be there. Then you've got your money that you're going to be in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Maybe you take a little bit and be a little more aggressive with that money because you got a little bit longer time frame, but that's your 5 to 10 year money. And then the third bucket is going to be that 10 plus year money. That's the money where we can afford to be a little more aggressive because the ups and downs in the market aren't going to be as impactful because, again, it's money that we're not going to need for 10 plus years. So in most cases, that's the money that's going to help you keep up with inflation over the long term. So again, in most cases, you don't want to stick all of your money in that 0 to 5 bucket because you're risk averse. Because again, that might actually cause more issues down the road as well because of being too conservative and not keeping up with inflation. This is another way of going about it where you kind of break up your expenses. This is where you separate out your mandatory expenses and your discretionary expenses. So if you think about mandatory, that's stuff that you're going to have to spend no matter what. You're going to have food, you're going to have utilities, you might have rent, you might have a house payment, you might have property taxes, homeowners insurance. There's going to be things you have to spend money on. Then you're going to have your discretionary expenses. That might be going out to eat. Maybe you go out, once a week. Discretionary might be that extra time or two of a week that you might go out to eat. It's going to be your travel, of course. It's going to be we call it your fun money. So this strategy is really surrounded on your mandatory expenses are covered by your fixed income, Social Security, pension, maybe guaranteed income from annuity. That covers your mandatory expenses. And then your discretionary expenses are then going to be covered by your portfolio, your investment assets, where there might be a little more volatility, a little more variability in those assets, so that if we did go through some type of difficult market, think about 2022, where kind of everything was down, bonds, stocks, everything was down. You might say, okay, I'm going to cut back on those discretionary expenses. I'm not going to take anything out of my portfolio so that I can give the market time to rebound and recover. Again, there's never been a permanent decline in the stock market. It always feels, but it's always scary. When you're right in the middle of it, it's scary. But if you have the right strategy, you can still manage it. So again, these are some of the pros and cons of each of these different strategies. Up next, I'm going to actually kind of walk you through the strategy that we utilize, because I think it makes a lot of sense and our clients really feel comfortable with it. But this is some of the pros and cons of these strategies that I just went through. Again, that live off the interest, very simple, but also some lower income. And there's really no inflation protection when you're talking about the live off the interest strategy. You got the mandatory versus discretionary. Again, more complex. It's a more complex strategy where you got to keep up with, well, what do I consider mandatory, what I consider discretionary. There's going to be some gray area there that can be a little bit confusing as to how you handle it. 4% rule, again, it's pretty predictable, not a whole lot of changes, but it also, a lot of that depends on how your investments perform. So, and then the bucket strategy has some flexibility. Again, a little more complex. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to do on your own, where you might need to engage a financial advisor to help you manage those buckets. So those are kind of the basic four. So now I want to walk you through what I consider to be our strategy. And that is what I call a dynamic income strategy, or guardrails. So when you compare this to something like the 4% rule, where you're just withdrawing 4% of your portfolio every single year, I kind of compare the 4% rule to like driving down the road with blinders on. You can't really see what's around you, so you don't make any adjustments. You can only see what's directly in front of you. And since you can't really see anything else, you don't really ever tap the brakes. You don't really push on the gas pedal at all. Very simple, very straightforward, but it might actually result in you not being able to spend as much as you potentially could. So I want to walk you through what I consider an example of a dynamic strategy and how that might work. So in this case, we say, okay, this particular individual has about 1.4 million, and that's going to be enough to generate about $9,400 a month in income. And that's including Social Security, investment income, all the different sources of income, around $9,400 a month. Now, with a dynamic strategy, we can come to the conclusion that we can actually make intelligent, unemotional decisions by using our guardrails. So we can say that, well, if we're approaching our upper guardrail, we can actually maybe we even surpass that upper guardrail, which in reality is historically going to happen more often than not, allows us to step on that gas pedal a little bit. We can actually increase our income. So we can maybe go from $9,400 a month or so up to closer to around $9,800. But there are going to be times when we approach or we even surpass that lower guardrail. If you approach that, you think about if you're driving up the side of a mountain, you don't just run into the side of the mountain. You simply tap your brakes a little bit. You center yourself and you keep moving forward. And that's really what this is, where we can make an unemotional decision to say, hey, we're getting near that lower guardrail. Let's adjust our income just a little bit. So we reduce our income, but it's one of those things that you notice in this example, if the value of your account were to temporarily decrease by 24%, again, I understand that it's always scary when this happens, but a 24% decrease in portfolio value, it only decreases your income by about 5%. That's about $500 a month, maybe even a little bit less. That might be one less vacation this year than you took last year. We aren't stopping our income. We're not having to make any huge changes. Again, we're just going to have to tap the brakes a little bit. And what this comes down to is that we're looking for a strategy that is designed to give you the highest possible monthly income without jeopardizing your portfolio when, not if, when markets decline. You never know when they're going to happen. Nobody saw the pandemic happening in 2020. Nobody necessarily predicted what would happen in 2022. But again, there's never been a permanent decline in the market. We just make these temporary adjustments until things get back to normal. And the key is having a war chest of cash and bonds, something very similar to the concept of the bucket strategy. We have our cash and bond bucket, which gets us through typically having maybe 3 to 5 years in that bucket, which has historically gotten us through the worst of times. Whether you're talking financial crisis, go back in time, 5 years in our war chest has pretty much done the trick to get us through whatever those difficult periods are. Making sure we strategically rebalance your portfolio, some careful diversification, tax efficiency, which we're going to touch on in just a second, but also discipline. Using those guardrails to make informed, unemotional decisions really becomes a key. All right, so let's touch on some of the basics because it's going to be, that's one of the things with tax planning, it's very individualized. So I just want to touch on a couple of key concepts here. So here you can see how some of these different retirement income sources are taxed. You've got Social Security benefits, which are up to 85% of your benefits may be taxable depending on your income, what other income you have, and your filing status. Pensions, all or part may be taxable depending on the plan itself. Earnings from work, of course, are typically going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. Investment income, if it's a taxable account, taxes are paid on that income as it's earned. So if you're getting interest or dividends, it's going to be taxed as you're earning those dividends and interest. And there's no tax taken out for spending on those when you're getting income from those accounts. IRAs, tax-deferred accounts, typically taxes are paid on the money as it's withdrawn. If you take a $10,000 distribution, you say, hey, I'm going to have 20% withheld for taxes or 10%. So you can have taxes withheld from those. And of course, annuities, that really depends on the type of annuity. Is it a non-qualified or an after-tax annuity where the earnings are taxed as ordinary income, but your basis, what you put into it, there's no tax on that? Or is it a qualified, an IRA or a 403B maybe, where it's an annuity inside of that type of construction where it's still fully taxable because it's an IRA, it just happens to be an annuity underneath an IRA umbrella. And of course, any of the other assets, whether it's rental income, anything like that, that really depends on the source of income that you've got. So tax planning strategies that you want to be aware of, we've got RMDs, required distributions, that are now from 73 to 75, depending on your year of birth. If you're born in 1960 or later, your required distribution age is now 75. If you're born before that, it's going to be 73. So you want to be aware that tax planning purposes. You want to think about, should I be converting traditional IRA money to Roth IRA based on what my tax bracket is? Can I delay Social Security? Can I reduce the number of years benefits are going to be subject to tax? So if you start later, less years that you're going to have to pay tax on your Social Security benefits. Can you reduce expenses? Again, if you reduce expenses, maybe that means you have less you have to take out of your retirement accounts. But you really want to continue to manage your taxes throughout retirement. We talk about reducing your lifetime tax liability, and really that is where the planning becomes so critical. Then, of course, we look at which accounts do we tap first. So typically you've got taxable accounts, which are typically going to be maybe a brokerage account. You've got tax-deferred accounts, which may be your 401ks, your IRAs, and hopefully you have some tax-free accounts. That could be Roth IRAs, maybe if you're in a high tax bracket, municipal bonds. Life insurance might fall into that category. But those are typically the three categories, and ideally you want to think about that like a three-leg table. If you only got two of the three legs, you don't have a very stable table. So we want to try to have all three of those legs as part of our tax table. You want to evaluate your risk tolerance, you want to look at your time horizon, and obviously your income needs as well. So what should you do next? So here's a quick action plan that we'll go through. So obviously you want to make sure you gather your resources as you're transitioning into retirement. Even if you're recently retired or early in retirement, this is still a great exercise to go through to start just, again, putting all these pieces, get all those pieces out on the table. Get your Social Security statements, your account statements, your retirement account statements, your credit cards, your tax returns, all these different pieces, and start trying to figure out how they're all going to fit together in the optimal way. Make a list of questions and concerns that you have. From there, once you've got that, if you might be a do-it-yourselfer, you can do the research, try to find the answers to your own questions. But if not, make appointments with advisors. Sit down with maybe 2, 3 financial advisors. Make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure you feel confident in their ability to help retirement. I'm a very strong believer in saying that a financial advisor cannot specialize, cannot be everything to everyone. I think you need to work with a financial advisor that specializes in retirement income planning in this retirement phase of life, because you have to understand these Social Security rules. You have to understand these tax implications. You got to, again, understand how all these pieces of this puzzle are ultimately going to fit together to help you meet your retirement goals. All right, so there's a lot of issues when you're building your retirement income plan, and it takes all hands, both yours, your advisors, to make sure you protect and manage your retirement savings. We've touched on a lot of these areas today. We want to make sure you plan, you visualize what you want your retirement to look like. You want to make sure you know what you're going to be doing, how you're going to be spending your time. Understanding all these, and again, how they fit together, what's the best way to fund these. So when you close out of our session today, once we get all wrapped up, you're going to be taken to our Simply Retirement Roadmap page. And that is our process for helping you evaluate our services and make an informed decision about whether we might be one of those firms that can provide you with the confidence that you're looking for to help you meet your retirement goals. In that process, we will perform a tax strategy analysis. We'll look at your investments, look at your asset allocation, do an analysis to make sure it's appropriate for what your retirement income needs are. And then we're going to provide specific retirement recommendations. What I tell you is this is very much like a roadmap. We figure out what your point A is, and we help you get to point B. So again, once we've wrapped up today, you close out of our session. That's where your landing page is going to be. Take a look at it, see if it makes sense. If it does, you can actually schedule a 20-minute get-to-know-you call right from that page. It just gives us a chance to get to know each other better. You get a chance to ask your questions. I'll ask you a lot of questions just to see if we're even a good fit for what you're looking for. If you're in that decision-making process of, hey, I really need some guidance, really need some help on taking that next step to live the retirement that you deserve.